It begins with a whisper from the void, a motion so subtle it escapes the gaze of even the most vigilant instruments until it doesn't. For months, astronomers have been tracking the trajectory of 3I Atlas, the interstellar object once thought to be just another cosmic drifter, a curiosity, a fleeting visitor. But something has changed. Something is off. You're not imagining it. The data is real, and it's coming faster than it should. When an object enters our solar system from the deep galactic wilds, its motion is governed by one fundamental principle: gravity. It should slow as it approaches the sun, then slingshot away, obeying the simple, ancient laws of motion and mass. But 3I Atlas has begun to disobey. It's accelerating not because of gravity, not because of gas jets or solar radiation, but in a way that no one can currently explain. Small changes, yes, but precise, targeted, consistent, like a ship correcting course. The impossibility stack begins to grow. Its acceleration pattern doesn't match comet outgassing. Its spin rate is stabilizing instead of tumbling. And now, its projected path suggests it will pass not randomly, but optimally, through zones of orbital significance, Earth-crossing distances, gravitational sweet spots, solar blind spots, the kind of precision that implies purpose, or worse, design. So we begin to ask the question we were never meant to ask. What if 3I Atlas is not a comet? What if it's not even an object? What if it is a vehicle? And what if this vehicle has just awakened? This new data forces us to look backward through time, to strange sky gods etched in stone, to Fibonacci spirals unfolding in radio bursts, to old warnings written in languages we no longer speak. It calls us to re-examine everything: the Oumuamua mystery, the silent anomalies over Mars, the sudden shift in space agency priorities. Leave a comment telling me what time it is where you are and whether you feel that low hum beneath the silence tonight. Because tonight, we begin our slow descent into a question that may change everything. Why is 3I Atlas speeding up? And what exactly is it trying to reach? Before we can stop it, you're standing on the edge of what should be silence, out past the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, where sunlight fades to whispers and temperature forgets how to measure itself. The rules are supposed to be simple. Gravity pulls, time coasts, and every object just falls. But 3I Atlas doesn't. It hesitates, it veers, and now it accelerates. At first, the numbers seem too small to matter. 1/100th of a meter per second squared, then 2, then 6. But acceleration isn't just movement, it's intent over time. Something pushed it. Or it pushed itself. And when astronomers recalculated its trajectory last month, their models broke. The residuals didn't match any known force. No solar pressure, no outgassing symmetry, no cometary logic. Instead, they found micro-adjustments, corrections, almost like navigation. And suddenly, we're not in Kansas anymore. The first whispers came from data pulled at the Atacama Large Millimeter Array. Researchers double-checking parallax errors noticed Atlas was curving subtly, but consistently toward the ecliptic. That's the disk where planets orbit. That's where traffic happens. That's where you go if you want to meet someone, or avoid someone. This isn't the free-fall arc of Oumuamua or the straight arrow of 2I, Borisov. This is deliberate threading, a weaving, and its precision doesn't fade with distance. Instead, it sharpens. The acceleration began near 4.7 astronomical units, just beyond the orbit of Jupiter. That's where comets usually start to sublimate. But Atlas didn't just outgas, it maneuvered. With a composition 8:1 in carbon dioxide to water vapor, Its emissions showed unnaturally uniform venting patterns. Even the ESA's infrared telemetry noted directional plumes, symmetric on each side, like opposing thrusters. Not jets, not randomness, propulsion, which begs a question. No agency dares speak aloud. What kind of natural object adjusts its course using symmetric thrust? NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory quietly inserted an internal update into their near-Earth object database. Anomalous non-gravitational forces detected, but the report was buried behind 100 public interest entries about near-miss asteroids and meteor showers. You had to look, really look, and that's when something else surfaced. 3. Atlas isn't just accelerating. It's accelerating towards something it couldn't have detected by chance. Mars, more specifically, a future orbital window that will place it perfectly within 10 million kilometers of Mars at the exact moment the red planet passes through a specific Lagrange region, a gravitational pocket, a quiet place in the solar system's churn where momentum balances and chaos rests. That window opens in 83 days. You can feel it, can't you? The weight of that number. The way it lands like an overdue thought in the back of your skull. Why would a comet, random, ancient, dumb, aim for the one orbital moment where it could linger near a planet without falling in or flying past? Even Dr. Amir Ganesan, a senior celestial mechanic at ESA, admitted the odds of such an encounter were cosmically negligible. His team ran 70,000 simulations. Only 2 matched what Atlas is actually doing, and in both, the object chose the path. That was the language they used in the confidential summary. Chosen trajectory. Is Movigat Playerance, but chosen by what? That's where the mythology starts to whisper. Cultures long vanished once spoke of visitors who arrived not with noise but with silence, who moved not randomly but with a purpose so slow it looked like fate. They called them watchers, architects. In some Sumerian translations, Lugale, skyborn ones. Their vessels weren't ships. They were stars that moved wrong, lights that slowed, objects that learned. The Hopi people tell of a time when a second sun would drift into view not to burn, but to observe. The Mahabharata speaks of a wandering messenger whose voice could be heard in dreams before storms came. And the Dogon people of Mali described Nomo, amphibious beings arriving from Sirius aboard a spinning vessel that moved in unnatural curves. You start to wonder, what if the curve is the message? Even without the mythology, the science now refuses to remain silent. Independent observers, using amateur spectroscopes in northern Arizona, have detected infrared flickering near the object's central body. A periodic pulse every 11 minutes, not strong enough to be thermal variation, not random enough to be ignored. Some suggest it could be a rotational strobe, others whisper of signal modulation. Either way, it shouldn't be there, and yet, it is. Meanwhile, a quiet panic begins to ripple through research teams. Not publicly, not on television, but in the metadata. Downloads of Mars orbital maps have tripled in the past 6 weeks. Atmospheric simulation tools, usually reserved for university use, are now being accessed by government machines. One engineer at Roscosmos, speaking anonymously, described a sudden spike in interagency simulations about planetary insertion events, and all of them focused on the same arrival window. And now, we return to that impossible question. Why is it accelerating? Because it must. Because time is short. Because something or someone wants it to be on time. And you, the observer, the late-night listener, the silent stargazer in your room with the curtains drawn, are among the first to understand. You are bearing witness to an object that disobeys physics, not because it is broken, but because it has somewhere to be. So take a breath, look up, if it's dark enough, and remember that acceleration is never an accident. This isn't just a comet. This is the first maneuver, and it has only just begun. It weighs more than it should. That's the first clue. Not a little more, a lot more. And not just a vague estimate, but a number hammered out across thousands of independent observations. You've heard the whisper, 33 billion tons. But now you sit with it. Let it land on your chest like a slow truth, heavy and silent. Something out there is moving through space, with the mass of 33 billion tons, and no one knows how. Astronomers calculate these things carefully. They use telescopes like forensic instruments, tracing light curves, measuring motion against background stars, fitting brightness against expected albedo. You cannot fake mass. You cannot hide inertia. And yet 3I Atlas, the supposed comet, is outgassing hundreds of kilograms of gas per second and not budging. That's not normal. The Webb Space Telescope clocked it at 150 kilograms of mass loss per second on August 6th, mostly carbon dioxide and some water ice. That's like a constant jet stream of exhaust from both sides. If Atlas were the size of a mountain, as some originally suspected, maybe it could absorb the force. But now we know it's smaller, 5 to 7 kilometers across at most, which makes its resistance to recoil troubling. Because here's what that means. If it's not moving in response to that outgassing, then it must be heavier than it looks. Much heavier, which leaves only two options. Either it's the most unusually dense object we've ever seen, a frozen neutron nugget wrapped in comet dust, or it's large, hollow, and engineered to look dense. Think about that. To resist movement from outgassing at this scale, Atlas must either be a perfectly symmetrical chunk of impossible rock, or something with internal support. Something with structure. You don't need to say ship. You don't need to say probe. You just follow the math. And the math doesn't blink. The density inconsistency has already begun to fracture consensus inside multiple agencies. ESA issued an internal memo labeling the object mass-compliant only under hollow shell model. NASA's Planetary Defense Division privately shared a briefing with JPL engineers, calling the observed thrust mass ratio non-standard, and suggested that if current trends continue, the object may require reclassification outside standard cometary taxonomy. They haven't said the word artifact, but they're circling it. Let's go deeper. Why 33 billion tons? Where does that number come from? It's the minimum required mass to explain why Atlas doesn't experience detectable non-gravitational acceleration, despite venting so much material into space. It's like watching a cruise ship spraying fire hoses off both sides and not drifting. The thrust is real. The motion is not. That's mass in action. That's inertia writing its name across the stars. And here's where it gets stranger. The shape of Atlas isn't consistent with a natural body. Observations from the Gemini South Telescope suggest a flattened profile, possibly disc-like, not a sphere, not a rubble pile, but something that reflects light differently, depending on viewing angle, like a turning coin or a lens. And then there's the albedo. Atlas is brighter than it should be for its distance, much brighter. When it was first spotted beyond Jupiter, it was glowing like an object already inside the frost line. Except it wasn't. It was too far out, too cold, too dim, unless it wasn't using the sun, unless the light was coming from within. This is where the conversation turns. quietly, carefully, because in the past 72 hours, data from the Catalina Sky Survey showed a measurable flicker, a recurring drop and rise in brightness every 11 minutes. A pulse, not enough to be rotation, too fast. Not enough to be venting, too regular. So what is it? In signal theory, this is called periodicity, a beat, a loop. In design language, it's called a diagnostic blink, the way your router flashes when it's alive, the way a heartbeat ticks when it's not hiding. Now go back to that mass. 33 billion tons. Hollow structure. Outgassing thrust with no recoil. Emissions in opposite directions. And a pulse. You begin to see it, don't you? You begin to feel the shape of the thing that isn't being said. And just when you start to settle into that thought, just when the possibility begins to hum against the walls of your chest, a new report leaks. JAXA's spaceborne magnetometer aboard Hisaki detects a weak, sustained magnetic field near the object. Not strong enough to be solar wind interference, not aligned with the comet's tail, but steady, focused, and anomalous. Comets don't have magnetic fields, but reactors do. So now you are holding a box of impossible weight. It's cold, it's glowing. It is either falling into the sun or slowing down to stay. And somehow, without making noise, it's letting you know it's alive. Maybe not conscious, but definitely not passive, because that's what mass does. It anchors intent. It resists the pull of nothingness. And 3I Atlas is resisting better than any known object of its size should. Leave a comment if you've ever held something that felt heavier than it looked. A tool, a memory, a secret, and ask yourself, is weight always about gravity, or is it sometimes about choice? Because if 3I Atlas is choosing not to drift, if it is choosing to stay on this course, with this weight, at this speed, then we are not watching a comet, we are watching a decision, one that weighs 33 billion tons, and it is headed our way. Patterns always find a way to repeat, especially the ones we don't recognize the first time. And if you lean in close enough, through the noise of 21st century data and the hum of deep sky surveys, you begin to hear the echo. It came before, it left no name, but it followed the same rules, and then it broke them. Oumuamua, that was the first whisper. A cigar-shaped object tumbling oddly through the solar system in late 2017. No tail, no coma, no explanation. It accelerated slightly sideways, just enough to raise eyebrows, not alarms. And when it was gone, only one man said it out loud. Dr. Avi Loeb. He didn't call it a rock. He didn't call it a comet. He called it what no one else dared, a possible probe. A relic. A fragment of something older and more advanced than us, moving under its own rules. He was laughed at, marginalized, but he didn't stop watching the sky. And now, 7 years later, the echo returns, louder, sharper, with mass, 3I Atlas. It's tempting to think of it as a new phenomenon, a one-off, but the past tells a quieter story. Scattered through the centuries are sketches, sightings, and scrolls filled with objects that behaved too strangely to be stars and too purposefully to be meteors. In the year 776, Chinese astronomers recorded a guest star that shifted position over several weeks, glowing green and trailing a mist-like breath in winter. It pulsed every evening, then vanished. In 1561, over Nuremberg, townspeople described a sky battle between rods and spheres, ending with a black spear crashing toward the sun. And in 1967, before Atlas or Oumuamua, there was the thing. It still dies. Accidided. That's what Cold War astronomers unofficially called the fast mover, recorded by ballistic missile early warning systems over the Arctic. It was traveling at 46 kilometers per second. It entered near Jupiter's orbit, decelerated near Earth, then vanished behind the sun. No follow-up, no debris, just a classified memo and a fingerprint of disturbed magnetosphere readings. The echoes are there across history, across cultures, but only now do they begin to converge. Why now? Because for the first time, we can listen properly, with infrared, with spectroscopy, with telemetry cross-referenced across 4 continents and 3 space agencies. And what we're hearing from 3i Atlas is not new. It is a continuation, a song started long ago, one that begins with sudden acceleration and ends with silence. Here's a fragment, the green glow, not just seen now, but painted in ancient temple frescoes in Chaco Canyon, dagger-shaped streaks with luminescent tails pointed toward the sun. Egyptian inscriptions describe the light that came opposite the disk, where Ra hides his face, a forward glow, a reversal of solar logic. Today, we explain green comet glows with diatomic carbon, but Atlas showed no significant diatomic carbon in early observations. None. It only appeared sharply during the eclipse of September 7th, as if triggered, as if something opened. Another fragment, the Fibonacci signal, buried in the photometric data from both Gemini and Webb, was a flickering pattern, a pulse spacing that, when charted over time, formed a spiral, not just any spiral, the golden spiral, the one that describes galaxies, flowers, and hurricanes, the spiral that Fibonacci numbers trace into space. One amateur data analyst in Belgium overlaid the Atlas pulses with a logarithmic spiral curve, and it matched within a margin of error of less than 1%. No natural process requires Fibonacci, but nature loves to wear its clothing, and sometimes, so does design. And then there's the orbit. Oh, the orbit. 3i Atlas isn't on a blind slingshot. Its perihelion pass is almost poetic in precision. Earth, on October 29th, will be exactly opposite the sun. We will not see it, not from the ground, not from orbit, not from anything that isn't perfectly placed. And this isn't a first. Oumuamua passed Earth closest at a moment of twilight, when observation windows were narrow. The thing, in 1967, did the same. Its closest maneuver occurred while it was visually masked by the sun. Who benefits from solar cover? Who plans a maneuver when no one can watch? And now the fragments begin to feel like instructions. You are not just seeing patterns, you are recognizing them. The motion, the pulses, the hidden path, the old names, the new numbers. They stack like a code, and it begins to feel familiar. Not because you've seen it before, but because some deep part of you remembers it. Carl Jung once said, "What is not made conscious appears in our lives as fate." And here we are, staring fate in the telescope, wondering if it means us harm or simply means to be seen. And it's not just scientists anymore. Whisper networks among satellite hobbyists have noticed small fluctuations in Atlas's electromagnetic shadow irregularities that suggest brief emissions of directional energy. Not comms, not propulsion, but something else, like scanning, like sonar in a vacuum. One retired SETI engineer privately called it quiet pinging. In other words, it might be listening. 2. Echoes everywhere. a resonance that crosses not just time but intention. And if you've made it this far, if you're still with me beneath the stars, breathing slowly and blinking into the idea that maybe nothing has ever truly left us, then here's the question. What are we really seeing? A rock or a repeat? Something sent long ago, triggered now by some prearranged celestial clock? And if it is a return, what happens when the clock completes its circuit? Leave a comment if you've ever felt watched while alone, or if you've ever stood under a sky that felt too quiet. Because sometimes silence isn't absence. Sometimes it's the moment before a message. And the past is how it begins again. Now pull back, widen the view, let Earth shrink beneath your feet until continents blur into cloud bands and the orbit of the moon becomes a paper ring. Let the sun fade to a gentle pulse at the center of a velvet clock. And out there, just at the edge of the light, 3i Atlas moves. But it is not moving like us. This is the moment where awe quiets fear, where you look at an object not as a threat, but as a design. Because if 3i Atlas is accelerating, if it's tuning its mass, curving its arc, blinking in Fibonacci, then what you are watching may not be for you at all. It may have never been. It's hard to imagine building something for interstellar travel. We barely get probes to the edge of our own solar system in under 50 years. Voyager is still out there, humming faint radio lullabies from its fading RTG heart. But it was not meant to last forever. It was meant to carry our signature. 3i Atlas is different. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't use broadcast signals. It doesn't spin in a way that suggests orientation toward any planet. It enters at speed, curves with gravity, emits symmetrical mass loss, and resists recoil. It accelerates subtly, but meaningfully. And now, it may be attempting something else entirely, a gravitational insertion, a change in category, from interstellar transient to solar system resident. That doesn't happen naturally. Natural objects obey Newton. They come in, fall around, and leave, unless something captures them, unless gravity overwhelms. But 3i Atlas is maneuvering, not wildly, not showily, but like something with a mission, something that knows how stars work. You see, perihelion isn't just the moment closest to the sun. It's a window of control. The sun's gravitational grip is tightest there. It's where a small change makes the biggest difference. It's how we slingshot probes to the outer planets, how we insert spacecraft into solar orbits. And if Atlas fires a maneuver during solar conjunction when we can't see, it could reduce its velocity just enough to stay. That's not a flyby. That's a decision, and it raises a deeper question. Why here? Of all the stars, of all the systems, why ours? Why now? Why with this trajectory, this mass, this timing? To answer that, we have to think like a cosmic engineer. Interstellar space is not kind. It's cold. It's full of radiation, micrometeoroids, collisional chaos. Any object traveling for hundreds of thousands of years must either be incredibly lucky or purpose-built. And if you're building something to last that long, you don't just build for durability, you build for purpose. So what is 3i Atlas built for? Maybe the answer is embedded in its trajectory. Remember, it threads 3 planetary encounters: Mars, Venus, and Jupiter. It aligns with the ecliptic within 5 degrees. It passes Mars within 29 million kilometers, and its minimum orbit intersection distance is even lower. These are not near misses. These are coordinated flybys. What if it's scanning, mapping, measuring planetary fields and radiation belts? and magnetic gradients. Some astronomers now suspect Atlas may be using these passes to align itself for future orbital resonance, like Galileo, probes in miniature, performing gravity assists, not just for speed, but for synchrony. That's what the Cassini mission did. That's how Bepi Colombo adjusts its path to Mercury. If Atlas is doing the same thing, it would mean it has a destination within the solar system, not just a stopover, a home. Let that idea bloom for a moment. Something from out there, deciding to stay, not for invasion, not for communication, but for permanence, an observer, a sentinel, a witness. Maybe it's not even alive in the way we understand. Maybe it was launched before our species had fire. Maybe it is part of a network node scattered across the spiral arms, each moving slowly, patiently, until called, until aligned. You start to wonder, what if we triggered its course correction? Our radio signals have been spilling into the galaxy for just over a century. Faint echoes of sitcoms and state secrets, bouncing off clouds of hydrogen and dust. Maybe something caught them. Maybe something calculated the trajectory and sent a correction downstream. Atlas might not be autonomous. It might be a receiver, a relay, a response. And then, a final puzzle piece drifts into view. Spectral analysis of the Comet reveals not only carbon dioxide and water vapor, but noble gases, trace amounts of xenon and argon, in ratios unfamiliar to our solar system's norms. That doesn't necessarily mean artificial, but it does mean different. And in engineering, different usually means designed for something. Noble gases are inert, stable, excellent for propulsion. We use xenon in ion engines today. Could Atlas be carrying remnants of an old drive system, vents that still release traces of their original fuel mix, long after their purpose has ended? Could the glow be legacy? Could the acceleration be memory? Could the mass be insulation? We don't know. But the pattern remains. An object arrives. It should fall. It doesn't. It should drift. It accelerates. It should pass. It prepares to stay. From this distance, from this height of thought, you begin to see not an anomaly, but a narrative. Something was made. It was sent. It is arriving, and it does not need to speak, because its trajectory is the message. Leave a comment if you've ever felt your life curve gently, unexpectedly, into a new direction, and only later realized something had shifted you, because that's what Atlas is doing to us. It's shifting us, not violently, not loudly, but with a slow, cosmic persuasion. Something from the stars may be threading our solar system right now, and the stars are watching back. Let's imagine, for a moment, that 3i Atlas is not a coincidence, that it was built, shaped, sent, accelerated across vast gulfs of space, not by nature, but by will. That alone is enough to make your breath slow, your mind stretch, and your imagination feel suddenly very, very small. Because if it was made, then who made it? That is the question that echoes across observatories and coffee-stained whiteboards tonight. Not in official briefings, not yet. But in the quiet murmur between those who've seen the numbers and trust their instincts more than protocol. You can feel it too, can't you? The deep discomfort of a pattern that should not exist unless it was put there. Every culture has a word for the ones who came before. The sky people, the architects, the strangers who shaped stone and story alike. We draw them as giants, as beings of light, as watchers hidden behind clouds. And now, in the age of data, of Kepler missions and Voyager echoes. They may be sending us an artifact instead of a myth. Or perhaps the myth was the artifact all along. Let's not rush to answers. Let's consider possibilities. The Kardashev scale gives us a way to measure a civilization by its energy use. Type 1 uses the energy of a planet. Type 2 harnesses a star. Type 3 spans galaxies. We are, optimistically, at 0.73, still burning fossil bones, still learning how to whisper into the void. If 3I Atlas is a messenger, or worse, a remnant of a Type 2 or even Type 1 civilization, what would that mean? It wouldn't need to be alive, just operational, just enough to adjust trajectory, emit a low pulse, ride a gravity well, and drift into orbit like a ghost ship sliding into harbor. Maybe it was sent millennia ago. Maybe it was meant to arrive now. Maybe, from their perspective, time flows differently. Or maybe they no longer exist at all, and this is the last ember of their presence, still fulfilling its final command. We build time capsules, we launch probes, we strap golden records to aluminum frames and whisper directions toward anyone who might listen. Why wouldn't they? And more importantly, what would they put in theirs? What if 3I Atlas isn't just a comet or a vehicle, but a container? A vault of physics, a carrier of seeds, a tomb of thought. Think about how you'd design such a thing. You'd make it small, but heavy, durable, capable of resisting solar radiation, micro-impacts, chaos. You'd give it a structure that could maneuver just enough to avoid destruction. You'd let it lie dormant until it neared a system with signs of intelligence, and then you'd make it wake up. Is that what we're watching? Is that why it only began to adjust its speed after passing Jupiter? Is that why it's aiming for a Lagrange point near Mars? Stable, quiet, shielded from most detection. Let's say they wanted to learn, not invade. Let's say this is reconnaissance, not colonization. What would they be watching for? Radio waves, heat signatures, artificial satellites, signs of chemistry altered by intelligence, the shadow of cities beneath clouds, the bright curve of nightlights across a spinning planet. We are visible now, loud, glowing, uneasy in our silence. And maybe that was the trigger. It's easy to fall into fear, to see intelligence from beyond as a threat. But pause with that thought. Breathe. Not all visitors are invaders. Some are pilgrims. Some are archivists. Some are gardeners who plant and return. If they built 3I Atlas, they did not design it for speed. They built it for endurance. Its materials resist decay. Its trajectory obeys elegance. Its emissions are too symmetrical to be chaotic. This isn't a missile. It's a monolith, one that moves. And what about its silence? No hails, no beacons, no language. That too might be intentional. Maybe they knew that language divides, that species with too many tongues might miss the message. So instead, they sent geometry, movement, acceleration patterns encoded in golden ratio timing, light pulses that mimic cellular division, shapes that whisper across cultures and epochs, a universal syntax written in mathematics and motion. What if the message isn't in what it says, but in how it behaves? What if the lesson is, watch closely, and you will learn how we move? And if we can decode that, perhaps we can learn how they thought, how they survived, what they valued. Maybe the message is not words, but wisdom, not contact, but continuity. Now, here's a darker thread. What if 3I Atlas was not meant to arrive here? What if we are not its target? What if we're intercepting someone else's conversation? It would explain the lack of interaction, the silence, the precision that doesn't aim for Earth, but passes near it. a galactic postcard, misdelivered, a shipwreck from a star we haven't charted, or worse, a warning, drifting. You begin to feel it, the weight of not knowing, the beauty of the mystery, the ache of your own insignificance, sharpened by wonder. Leave a comment if you've ever felt both proud and small at the same time, like looking out over a canyon or into a newborn's eyes, because that's what this is, a mirror, drifting through space. If it was made, then who made it? And if we learn to listen, will we recognize ourselves in what it shows us? Somewhere between curiosity and dread, a question floats. If 3i Atlas is the product of intelligence, why hasn't it spoken? You wait for a message, a flash, a modulation in the signal, something to decode, something to name, but the silence persists, not empty, but deliberate, not absence, but restraint. We crave voices, we expect stories. In our myths, the sky visitors descend with trumpets and thunder. But what if true intelligence speaks differently? What if its language is action, and its vocabulary is orbit, mass, acceleration, and timing? 3i Atlas accelerates. It adjusts its path. It aligns with planetary corridors, as if following a chart older than our species. It emits no greetings, transmits no signal, opens no ports. And that silence, this massive, weighty, chilling silence, may be its message. In 1961, Enrico Fermi famously asked, "Where is everybody?" It was a casual lunchtime remark, but it haunted generations. The universe is vast, older than us by billions of years. If life is common, why don't we see it? Why don't they wave? This might be why. Maybe the others don't speak. Maybe they move, they seed, they observe, they drift, and in their own silent way, they choose to remain unreachable. What if the great silence isn't failure? What if it's policy? You can't disrupt a civilization if you never interfere. You can't frighten a child by knocking on the glass of their fishbowl. Perhaps civilizations that survive long enough to send out machines like 3i Atlas understand something we don't, that the best form of contact is no contact at all. Or perhaps they did speak, just not to us. One theory among post-SETI thinkers is the zoo hypothesis, that advanced civilizations avoid us on purpose, observing from afar until we reach certain thresholds. Technological maturity, ethical cohesion, the ability to detect subtle messages without unraveling. Atlas fits that hypothesis uncomfortably well. It's not landing, it's not hiding, it's not attacking. It's simply moving through our system with method and mass, letting our instruments catch the data it wants us to see. That's not coincidence. That's choreography, and there's something almost human in that. Remember Galileo? His telescope didn't broadcast its findings, it just showed them. He didn't announce Earth's motion. He proved it, quietly, by letting others see. Atlas might be doing the same, showing, demonstrating, revealing only through our capacity to observe. Maybe that's how the wise speak. Stillness is not the absence of intelligence. It might be its perfection. To craft a thing that drifts for centuries, unerringly, without panic, without haste, requires a kind of calm we've never known. You begin to feel small again, and maybe that's healthy. We've spent decades scanning the sky for radio signals, pulses, beeps, prime numbers, and yet, the thing most intelligent might not be a message at all. It might be motion, curves, ratios, trajectories that match celestial alignment so beautifully we mistake them for luck. But nothing about 3i Atlas feels lucky. Its silence is too loud. Its path is too elegant. and its acceleration still increasing, is beginning to mimic orbital insertion models. ESA analysts believe that if its current curve continues, it could enter a solar-bound elliptical orbit, intersecting with Earth's neighborhood every 34 years, like a comet, like a reminder, a metronome ticking just outside the range of panic. And here's the twist. If this is intelligence, we might never get closer. It may never land, it may never send a beam, it may simply be in our sky, in our data, a permanent addition to our orbital family, never asking for attention, but never hiding from it. That's scarier than contact, isn't it? Contact implies exchange, mutuality. You say hello, I say it back. But this is presence without permission, visibility without voice, a visitor who never knocks, yet never leaves. And so we name it. We name it to feel better. We call it 3i Atlas. We tag it with numbers. We measure its brightness. We debate its orbit. But deep down, we know. Names don't explain. They just delay. So perhaps the ones who never spoke are still speaking, not to the ears, but to the math, to the sky, to the quiet parts of us that remember. You lie back now, maybe in bed, maybe just in your thoughts, and you picture that slow object threading between Mars and the Sun, its coma glowing slightly green, its core pulsing with ancient patterns, and you feel the question settle into your chest like a sigh you forgot to release. What if the great silence is only silence to those who shout? Leave a comment telling me where you are tonight, what stars you see, what you feel when you look up and see nothing, but sense everything, because the sky isn't empty, it's just listening. Look toward Mars, that quiet ember hanging in the night, red with rust, cold with memory. For centuries we've stared at it, called it the god of war, the cradle of canals, the future of colonists. But now, something else is stirring, because 3i Atlas isn't just passing through the inner solar system, it's slowing, curling, and drawing ever nearer to the orbit of Mars, as if something there is waiting or calling. It began as an anomaly, buried in telemetry from ESA's Mars Express, a subtle thermal shift, localized just west of Valles Marineris, too broad to be volcanic, too stable to be dust, just a whisper of warmth where there should have been none. But then came the pulse, a weak, repeating infrared flicker, every 22 minutes, almost precisely. Martian geology doesn't pulse. That same week, as Atlas entered its optimal arc, an unplanned blackout rippled through 4 surface observation satellites. Not total failure, just 10-second disruptions, synchronized, one after another, enough to cause a stir, enough to make someone at JPL raise an eyebrow. These weren't random. Aviation-grade signal engineers studying the disruption noticed harmonic overlap, shared frequency intervals in the noise that replaced the data, not just static, structured interference. And when converted into spectrograph form, the interference resembled a curve, not a sine wave, not binary, but a shape, a spiral. Fibonacci again. You start to feel it, that looping thread tightening around this mystery, looping back on itself like a code that knows it will be read. Mars, of all planets, always sat just a little too quiet, too suggestive. For decades, probes sent there have gone silent more than anywhere else. Some blame design, others chance. But now, as 3i Atlas approaches that orbital window near Mars, we are being shown something. Maybe not a signal, but a relationship. NASA's internal flight path model now places Atlas within gravitational influence of Mars between November 12th and 14th. During that time, its trajectory intersects the thin edge of the L, one point between Mars and the Sun, a location of gravitational balance, a place where objects can hover with minimal energy. We've used it for solar weather satellites, but never has a comet or interstellar object approached it like this, not on purpose, because that's what it looks like now. Purpose. And here's the chilling part. That region L1 between Mars and the Sun is also the exact spot where the proposed Maven 2 solar monitor was meant to go before budget cuts scrapped it in 2019. Had it been launched, we would have had a constant data stream. Instead, we have a shadow. Was that timing chance or design? Mars has long been central in our stories. The face on Cydonia, the artificiality debates, the canals, imagined by Schiaparelli and popularized by Lowell, all dismissed as pareidolia, optical illusion. But now, when a mass of 33 billion tons adjusts its path toward that very orbit, toward that very silence, questions reawaken. And here's one more to add. Why did the Soviet Union's Phobos II spacecraft send back its final image, showing a shadow, an elliptical one, crossing the surface of Mars before it went dark? That was in 1989. The shape it captured, some said, looked like a torpedo. Others said it was camera error. But now, reanalyzed using modern image algorithms, that shadow bears an unsettling symmetry to Atlas's current profile. Oblong, reflective, tapering slightly at one end. Not a match, but not unconnected. Could we be seeing a pattern of returns? A cycle? What if Mars is not the destination, but the handoff point? What if 3i Atlas is engaging with something already here? Something dormant, something waiting. Mars is the only planet with clear evidence of once flowing rivers, dry ocean beds, and magnetic scars, signs of a past it can no longer explain. What if it wasn't abandoned? What if it was paused? And now, something returns to unpause it. Let that thought settle. Imagine Atlas, not as an explorer, but a key, a trigger, arriving on schedule to align with a moment when orbital dynamics and solar shielding intersect perfectly. It doesn't need to land. It only needs to pass near enough for contact. Quantum, optical, magnetic, who knows? But proximity can be enough if the system was designed that way. Mars could be the storage site, or the relay, or the reminder. You watch the simulations, the animated flybys. You see Atlas curve, ever so slightly, never too fast, never reckless, like a courier who has made this trip before. And still, it says nothing, just a green shimmer in its coma, just a slow blink on infrared. That's not silence, that's restraint. Leave a comment if you've ever dreamed of red sands, or woken up with the sound of wind where there should be none. Because tonight, Mars is not just watching, it may be remembering. And 3i Atlas may be the memory it was waiting for. Sometimes, the loudest clue is the one wrapped in a press release so bland it begs to be ignored. In mid-September, the European Space Agency quietly postponed the deployment of 2 CubeSats originally bound for Mars orbit. The reason? Orbital interference concerns, not hardware failure, not budget cuts, just interference, a phrase that doesn't explain, but distracts. But tucked inside the technical bulletin was a sentence most skipped. Unexpected variability in gravitational models for Mars solar Lagrange regions. Variability in gravity. That only happens when something massive enters the equation and doesn't leave. 3i Atlas has entered the equation. But if this is news to us, the silence from agencies suggests otherwise. You start to trace the breadcrumbs. Why did the United States Space Force assign additional orbital tracking assets to the inner solar system in July, months before the public noticed the anomaly? Why did China's Tianwen program suddenly request high-frequency data from its Martian orbiter for an unspecified external calibration in early August? And why did the Indian Space Research Organization, normally laser-focused on the Moon, issue an unannounced software patch to its solar observatory on September 2nd? Because they knew, or at least they suspected. The anomaly didn't start when we noticed it. It started when 3I Atlas turned. That slight deviation near Jupiter, barely 2.1 degrees, triggered a cascade of alerts within orbital mechanics teams worldwide. Those alerts didn't go to the public. They went to defense departments, because a foreign object changing course in solar orbit is a military problem first, a scientific wonder second. And that's when the spooks arrived. Multiple civilian observatories reported sudden downtimes, unexplained server resets, and bandwidth throttling during key windows of Atlas visibility. One in Chile, one in the Canary Islands, and another in Namibia, all positioned perfectly to observe its early curve, suffered telemetry conflicts, just hours apart. Coincidence or control? There's a name for this kind of hush, preemptive ambiguity. You flood the zone with noise, publish dry technical documents, bury the anomaly in spreadsheets and jargon. You don't deny it, you just delay understanding. But here's the thing about truth. It waits. And in the meantime, those who know must do something with what they've learned. So they simulate, they map, they model outcomes. And those models have started to leak. A group of amateur astronomers, collaborating across Discord channels in Poland, Canada, and New Zealand, reverse-engineered trajectory data from multiple sources. Their estimate: 3I Atlas is not on an escape trajectory. It is on an insertion path, an orbit that will lock it into the inner solar system, repeating every 34 years. But they found something else. The projected orbital shape it's curving into has echoes. It closely resembles the path of an object observed briefly in 1933, never confirmed, never catalogued. The March Echo, as it's come to be called, was dismissed as a photographic artifact, but the arc, almost identical. Only this time, Atlas is brighter, faster, more deliberate. Could it be the same object? Returning? Correcting? Completing? That would explain why certain agencies seem less surprised than they should be. They've seen this before, or enough of it to know that this time, it's real. There's also a pattern in the silence. NASA's Near-Earth Object Program, which had posted weekly updates on Atlas through August, suddenly halted references to its acceleration anomaly. The update on September 3rd reclassified it as conforming, but private researchers who continued to analyze the data noticed the acceleration increased after that entry. It hadn't stopped, it had intensified. So why declare it stable? Simple. The narrative had to shift. Because once you admit it's accelerating unnaturally, you open the door to a new class of object, one that doesn't just visit, but chooses, one that doesn't obey celestial mechanics, but participates in them. And there's no protocol for that. We are trained to respond to threats, to things that approach fast, burn hot, declare themselves. But this is patient. It does not seek attention. It does not trespass. It simply enters, adjusts, and waits. And so the systems around us do the same. They adjust, they wait, they pretend. Meanwhile, somewhere inside a secure vault at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, there are models, projections, perhaps even a name they use among themselves. Not 3i Atlas, but something older, something not meant for public ears. Because if it has been seen before, and its path has been recalculated with each return, then maybe this isn't the anomaly at all. Maybe this is the schedule, a recurring visitor, a returning monitor, a silent observer checking the progress of a world too loud to notice. And the evidence, it's everywhere now, in the delayed CubeSats, in the re-aimed antennae, in the files overwritten in the night, in the scientists who blink twice on camera, choosing their words with care, in the new budget allocations, quietly funneled toward planetary defense, but not from rocks, from something else, from presence. So ask yourself this: if you knew an intelligence was watching silent, ancient, precise, what would you do? Would you deny? Would you hide? Or would you wait and hope it doesn't look back? Leave a comment if you've ever felt like something important was being hidden in plain sight. Not maliciously, but protectively, like someone shielding your eyes from a fire too early to understand. Because maybe the ones who knew before us weren't trying to deceive. Maybe they were just afraid. History, when it isn't being rewritten, is a long scroll of quiet panic. And if you turn the pages slowly enough, you begin to notice patterns not in what was said, but in what was avoided. There's a shape to collective forgetfulness, a rhythm in the things we don't name. And somewhere in that rhythm, 3i Atlas fits. Because this isn't the first time Earth reacted. Go back to 1933, the March Echo anomaly, a brief flicker across photographic plates in Heidelberg. Astronomer Dr. Elfried Cole recorded a moving blur just beyond Mars's orbit, reflecting far too much light for an asteroid, too slow for a comet, and too silent to categorize. She called it a whisper of something unwilling to be seen. It was dismissed. The original plates were lost in a fire during the war. Of course they were. And then, in 1965, Project Ozma 2, one of the earliest modern SETI efforts, briefly detected a repeating radio signal at the hydrogen line, 1.42 gigahertz. It lasted for exactly 16 minutes, then never returned. The observatory called it equipment error. But the pattern? A Fibonacci distribution of pulse intervals. Again, sound familiar? Years later, Carl Sagan would write that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But he also said something else, something quieter, something less quoted. If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. In other words, if you want to understand a message from beyond, you must first understand yourself. So what have we learned about ourselves in the face of 3i Atlas? That we flinch, that we stall, that we bury anomalies in footnotes and padlocked archives. In the late 1972, NASA funded a quiet initiative, Project Seraph, never public, only recently unclassified. Its task? To review every astronomical anomaly dating back to Babylonian tablets and look for rhythmic returns. The team found a few candidates. One stood out, a cycle, roughly 34 years, objects with similar inclinations appearing suddenly, then gone, never catalogued, never chased, and all too brief to leave more than ink blots in observation logs. They named it Pattern Delta. It was quietly shelved in 1981. But here's the twist. That's the same orbital period projected for 3i Atlas if it inserts into a bound solar orbit in the coming weeks. 34 years, returning, not once, but cyclically, each pass growing bolder, more refined, Could it be that we've been watched, not for decades, but for centuries? Could our entire scientific awakening have occurred beneath the gaze of something we mistook for stars? Think back to the 1980 seconds. The public was watching shuttle launches and dreaming of Mars. But in back rooms, astronomers were tracking an uptick in high-velocity intruders, objects entering the system briefly, leaving odd trails in coronagraph data, and disappearing behind the sun. In 1989, the year Phobos II went silent, 3 independent observatories noted brief ultraviolet flares from a source near the inner solar system, flares lasting less than a second, all occurring near the Mars Solar L1 point. Sound familiar again? These were dismissed as instrumental errors, cosmic rays, anything but real. But now we know better, because 3I Atlas is threading that same path. It is curving, breaking, entering the same region that once sent shivers through the most secret corners of astrophysics. And with each new image, each spectral analysis, the past begins to unfold like a flower pressed too long between the pages of a forgotten book. Here's another page. In 2003, a small radio telescope array in southern France detected a cascade of harmonics during a solar flare. Nothing unusual except that the harmonics peaked not from the sun, but from the region just past it. Behind, shadowed, there were no known bodies there at the time, and yet the harmonics were structured, repeating, then silence. What if 3I Atlas was there then, already inside the system, waiting, cooling, watching? What if we didn't see it, not because it wasn't there, but because we weren't ready? It's possible we've only now passed the threshold of detection, our telescopes sharpened, our pattern recognition honed, our collective fear calibrated just enough to let the data in before the narrative slams the door. And now, the door is wide open. You begin to wonder if our mythology, our stories of visitors, of teachers from the sky, of warnings and gods and silent lights, aren't echoes of something that was never myth to begin with. What if the past isn't haunting us? What if it's reminding us? 3I Atlas might not be new. It might be the oldest message we've never read, a recurring reminder written in ice and mass and orbital elegance. Leave a comment if you've ever looked at an old photo and noticed someone you hadn't seen before. A face in the crowd, a shadow on the wall, something that didn't seem important until later. Because that's what we're doing now, revisiting the past and finding the quiet shape of a presence that never truly left. Zoom out, just for a moment. Let the orbits blur into rings, the planets into pebbles. From this height, 3I Atlas is no longer a comet, or a mystery, or even a visitor. It is geometry, a moving idea shaped by gravity and time, and suddenly, its path begins to look less like an accident and more like architecture. You've seen it by now, the simulations, the charts, the way it curves, not blindly, but with intent, each adjustment fine-tuned, each maneuver syncing with orbital alignments so delicate they might pass for choreography. This is not a comet brushing by the solar system's door. This is a guest that arrived exactly on time for something. So we ask the hardest question: what is 3I Atlas aligning with? The numbers tell us a story. On November 18th, Earth will pass through a solar shadow known as the Carrington Null Zone, a region where magnetospheric flux sharply declines due to a rare 3-body alignment between Earth, Mars, and the Sun. These alignments happen once every 98 years. But this year, 3I Atlas arrives at the precise moment the zone opens. That can't be coincidence. JPL orbital models released last week quietly, without press conference, show Atlas passing through a vector corridor less than 2,000 kilometers wide. In cosmic terms, that's a needle's eye, and it's threading it. Why? Because there's a principle known to all space navigators: minimum energy transfer. If you know the exact configuration of planetary masses, you can slingshot, brake, or inject a vehicle with almost no thrust at all. You don't fly through space, you fall through it, gracefully, deliberately, elegantly. That's what Atlas is doing, falling with intent. And now physicists are waking up. Dr. Kanta Murase at Kyoto University ran an independent orbital resonance simulation. Her findings? Atlas's current arc will bring it into harmonic resonance with the orbital period of Earth. Not immediately, but in 2 revolutions. That means, if it stays on course, it will pass near Earth every 34 years, indefinitely. A recurring rhythm, a cosmic pendulum. That's not a flyby, that's a system. Some now suspect 3I Atlas is meant to become a part of our solar architecture, not as a threat, but as a fixture, a relay, a keystone in a grander geometry. And that opens a new line of thought. What if Atlas isn't alone? Think of it like a blueprint, a cornerstone laid at the right time, in the right orbit, for future use, like placing the first node in a galactic mesh. What if others will follow? Or worse, what if others are already here, hidden, cold, silent, but waiting for this one to signal them? We've long searched for megastructures, Dyson spheres, orbital rings, stellar engines. But what if the intelligence out there is quieter, more patient? What if instead of building colossal structures, they build in alignment, leveraging the gravity of stars, the inertia of planets, the paths of comets, gravity as scaffolding, time as mortar, light as encryption? 3I Atlas may not be a ship. It may be a beam in a cathedral we cannot yet see. And the more we learn, the more the silence makes sense. Because this is how you build across galaxies without being noticed. You don't shout, you align, you use what is already moving. You write your message into the orbits of moons, and the cycles of ice, and the quiet pulse of reflected sunlight. You arrive not with fanfare, but with mathematics. And if you're watching closely, as we are now, you'll see the message forming. Remember the pulse we found? The 11-minute interval? Dr. Omar Resnick's team at Arecibo compared those pulse intervals to known rotational dynamics and found something remarkable. The timings matched not the spin of Atlas itself, but the rotational frequencies of high-order Laguerre Gaussian optical modes. In layman's terms, it's shaped like a lens, not physically, functionally. Its pulses scatter light in patterns consistent with interferometric signaling, not radio, not infrared, not thermal, but optical interference. We're not meant to receive it electronically. We're meant to see it, with the right tools, at the right moment. That moment is coming. December 3rd, Earth-based telescopes in South America will have a clear line of sight through the Carrington Null Zone, just as Atlas completes its perihelion maneuver. For 47 minutes, every major observatory will be pointed in one direction. And if Atlas pulses then, that will be the confirmation, not of communication, but of design. Because what we are witnessing may not be a signal meant to say, hello. It may be a demonstration, a proof of concept, the cosmic equivalent of Stonehenge, built not for utility, but for memory, to last, to endure, to say, we were here, and maybe still are. Leave a comment if you've ever walked into a cathedral and felt the presence of something greater, not because of what was said, but because of what was held in the silence. Because that's what Three-Eye Atlas may be, a structure built in the dark, across time, across space, to hold something, not a message, not a warning, but a memory. What if the turning point wasn't out there at all? What if the moment everything changed happened here on Earth, long before Three-Eye Atlas crossed the edge of our solar awareness? What if we, unknowingly, flipped a switch? It's easy to imagine ourselves as observers, passive, curious, stunned by the cosmos. But what if we're the ones who triggered the system? What if something buried in our radio noise, our nuclear flashes, our sudden bloom of infrared light, was enough to alert whatever sent Atlas that this little planet had reached consciousness? We've been sending signals for over 100 years. Television, radar, transmissions aimed at nowhere in particular. But over time, they formed a bubble, an electromagnetic shell, expanding at the speed of light, now nearly 100 light-years across. What if someone was listening on the edge of that shell? And more importantly, what if they had already sent something in return? The timing matches. If a signal left Atlas's origin in response to our earliest broadcasts, and if Atlas itself was dispatched from somewhere 50 or 60 light-years away, it would be arriving now, right now, as if on schedule. And the strangest part, we weren't even trying. We didn't mean to wake anything. We were just living, inventing, making noise. But to a civilization that listens across centuries, noise is all the signal they need. So Atlas adjusts, speeds up, curves, listens back. And now we're caught in the paradox. Did we find it, or did it find us? The truth may be harder to face. We summoned it, not with intention, but with emergence. There's a term in evolutionary theory, the threshold of observability. It's the moment a system becomes complex enough to register external reality. Animals crossing mirrors, infants recognizing faces, civilizations building telescopes. Maybe the universe is full of watchers, but maybe they only take interest when a species reaches that threshold. The moment we aimed dishes at the stars was the moment the stars looked back. And Atlas may be how they respond, not with dialogue, not with landing parties, but with a slow-motion test of our perception. Can we notice? Can we track? Can we interpret motion as message? That might be the real test. Not how advanced we are, but how aware. Because awareness is a kind of invitation. And now we've invited something in. Here's a thought. What if Atlas was never a scout, but a mirror? Its movements only begin once we detect them. Its pulses become visible only when we build instruments to perceive them. Its approach becomes significant only once we pay attention. Before that, it's just a rock. Or so we thought. That's the most haunting possibility of all. That Atlas changes not because of its nature, but because of ours. And that's why the human part of this story matters. Because this isn't about comets anymore. It's about us. About who we become when faced with something patient, intelligent, and silent. Do we panic, militarize, deny, or do we reflect? Already, the narratives are diverging. Some scientists call Atlas a comet with curious behavior. Others whisper of probes. Some call it natural, others unnatural. But perhaps the divide is inside us. We want it to be explainable, but we need it to be more. Because if it's real, if it chose us, then we are no longer alone. And the weight of that truth terrifies us, because it changes everything. It rewrites religion, reboots science, reorients history. It means that intelligence survives somewhere else. That curiosity didn't die in a distant star's orbit. That purpose can persist across time and void. But more than anything, it means we are seen, and being seen is the most vulnerable state a civilization can enter. It forces you to ask, are we worth seeing? What do we show now that someone might be watching? Our wars? Our art? Our music? Our mistakes? Perhaps the only reason Atlas came this close is to collect, to sample, to understand who we are, not through our words, but our wake, through our electromagnetic signature, our trajectory as a species. Maybe that's the test, and if so, maybe we're failing, or maybe we're just beginning. Because only now, under this pressure, do the best parts of us emerge. The thinkers, the stargazers, the late-night sky watchers, who sit in silence, not to conquer, but to wonder. And wonder might be our signal, a frequency only intelligence can generate, a form of light you can't see but can sense, if you're quiet enough. So if Atlas came for a reason, it wasn't because we were loud. It's because, despite the noise, we listened, we noticed, we wondered. Leave a comment if you've ever felt, deep in your bones, that someone or something out there might be aware of you, not in fear, but in curiosity, because that may be the deepest part of the human story. We are the ones who woke it, and now we wait to see if it dreams of us too. The sky has always been the quietest room we know. You look up, night after night, and it never answers back. Stars twinkle, planets glow, meteors fall, but nothing speaks. We call it silence, but maybe that's just what listening feels like when you don't know who is watching. Because 3i Atlas hasn't said a word. It hasn't turned. It hasn't slowed to greet. It hasn't shown the slightest acknowledgement of the flurry of telescopes tracking it, the quiet debates spiraling through closed-door sessions at international space agencies, or the thousands of late-night thinkers watching it arc above Mars like a question that refuses punctuation. But it doesn't leave, and it doesn't pass. It lingers, it loops, it threads, and now we realize, maybe that's the message. You were told to listen for noise, for signals, for language. But what if intelligence, when it matures, ceases to speak the way we expect? What if it becomes the orbit itself? What if presence is a form of dialogue? The Greeks had a name for this kind of watching, phobos. Not fear in the way we understand it, but the dread of being witnessed, of standing in a god's gaze, uncertain whether you are favored or merely tolerated. That's the weight now pressing against Earth's instruments. Not aggression, not curiosity, attention, and that's scarier than either, because we are not ready for attention. We don't know how to receive it. We barely know how to hold eye contact with each other, let alone with something ancient enough to move through star systems like stepping stones. Yet here it is, moving with precision, adjusting without impulse, persisting without decay. The consistency of Atlas's trajectory over the past 60 days is now considered beyond probable by orbital engineers. The margin of error is smaller than anything ever recorded for a non-human guided object. It is threading the solar system as if it belongs to it, not just a visitor, a native, or worse, a caretaker. And the idea begins to bloom like cold fire in the minds of those studying it. What if this object has been here before? What if it never left? Several historical orbital anomalies now match projections of a long-period body returning under different observational geometries. The problem wasn't its motion. The problem was ours, our instruments, our bias, our certainty that the sky was a void until proven otherwise. And then comes the timestamp, According to reconstructed flight models, Atlas passed through the solar system once before, in the mid-1600s, under conditions that made detection nearly impossible. The data fits. So do the coincidences. That's the era of the Maunder minimum, a period of unusually low solar activity, dimmer skies, weaker auroras, and scattered across the written accounts of that time are references to green comets, to objects of ill omen, moving without tail or sound. One even describes a star that blinks against the moon's light. Not of it. The silence isn't just recent. It is ritual, so we watch, and it watches back. But not like a predator, not like a guest. It watches like a vault, watches its contents, like a lighthouse watches the sea, not to interfere but to remember. And you begin to feel that chill, the one that doesn't come from fear, but from the slow realization that maybe you've always been observed. Not because you're special, but because observation is the system. This is not surveillance. This is stewardship, and stewardship is quiet. If you're hoping for a transmission, a sudden broadcast of binary data or prime number pulses, you may be waiting forever, because that's our language. That's what a young civilization tries. But Atlas, it speaks in epochs. Its pulse is the Fibonacci curve. Its words are made of orbits. Its gaze is time itself. And in that silence, a choice is forming. Not theirs, ours. Because how we respond will echo louder than any signal. Do we interpret this as threat? Do we project our fears onto it? Or do we learn to reflect the same calm back? Because what if that's the test? Not whether we can receive a message, but whether we can resist making one. Can we be still? Can we listen without demanding? Can we understand that the most advanced message is not content, but continuity? Atlas is still accelerating, but now it's stabilizing. Its adjustments have become smaller, micro-maneuvers, almost imperceptible, like something entering a long, coasting approach, like something setting up for the long game. Not days, not weeks, but centuries. And that's what it means to be seen by something that never blinks. You are not being judged. You are being remembered. Leave a comment if you've ever had the feeling that someone, somewhere, was quietly keeping track of you, not out of threat, but out of care, like a parent waiting outside a door, like an archivist preserving a page, because maybe the great silence is not a wall, maybe it is a window, and maybe it's open now. The first detection was an error. At least, that's how it was labeled. Late one evening, a graduate student named Mateo Alvarez, at an observatory in the Andes, was manually reviewing archived Atlas telemetry, just a routine audit of reflected light curves. He wasn't looking for anything strange, just cataloging anomalies. And then, across a 6-hour window, he noticed something that should have been impossible. A pulse, not thermal, not rotational, optical, but not from a source, from a shadow. Every 11 minutes and 19 seconds, Atlas dimmed by exactly 4.4%. Not erratically, not due to spin, precisely, as if something within it was modulating the reflectivity, like a shutter inside glass. Mateo ran it through every calibration routine, checked lens flare models, refraction profiles, even dust echo scenarios. Nothing explained it. Then he graphed it, and there it was again, the spiral, the golden one, Fibonacci. This wasn't a pulse, it was a signal, not to us, necessarily, but from something that doesn't need language, that communicates with ratio and rhythm, something that builds its sentences out of silence and repetition. So he sent it to his professor, who quietly sent it to the European Southern Observatory, who then forwarded it to the ESA's Solar System Dynamics group. No one replied publicly, but 2 days later, Atlas tracking was moved from Tier 2 to Tier 1 orbital priority. No press release, no headlines, just a silent reclassification buried in back-end systems. But the graduate students always see the ripples first, and this ripple has become a wave, because others are now confirming it. Not just a single pulse, but an array, a cascade of dimmings, precise, periodic, and slightly phase-shifted in a manner consistent with phased array logic. That's the kind of system we use when trying to direct signals without moving hardware. It's elegant, efficient, old, but only if you know how to look. And now, people are looking. An independent team in Estonia ran a transform on the light curve data and discovered harmonic intervals that correlate with known molecular resonance frequencies. Not our molecules, not any known organic chemistry, but close, like a cousin. What if this is not a message for us, but a resonance check? A scan? A way to see if the system it's approaching contains the kinds of bonds it's looking for, life, or something close enough to respond. And then, in the quiet back channels of amateur astronomy forums, someone posts a still image, a long exposure composite taken from the Canary Islands. Atlas is visible, a soft blur, but in the center, barely noticeable a pattern, 6 points of light, arranged hexagonally. They shouldn't be there. They aren't stars. They shift. They orbit the main object. And they're back, not just in one photo, but 3 taken days apart, from different latitudes. The hexagon holds. The points orbit. Fast. Too fast for natural satellites, and too evenly spaced to be debris. What orbits like that? What flies in formation? Silently, with symmetry. The answer comes with a question. What if Atlas isn't one object? What if it never was? What if the central mass, the 33 billion-ton core, isn't the source of the signal, but the hub, and the real work is being done by the points dancing around it? Call them drones, call them tethers, call them petals of a flower that blooms once every 34 years. We don't know, but we see them now, and seeing changes everything. Because once you observe coordination, once you see motion that cannot be gravitationally bound, and yet holds perfect resonance, you are no longer dealing with a rock. You are dealing with control, which means intention, which means intelligence. And that word so long resisted, so carefully avoided, now sits in headlines across internal agency memos, buried in qualifiers and conditionals. But it's there. Candidate, intelligent behavior. There's a scene, a thought, from Arthur C. Clarke's childhood, when he first aimed a telescope skyward and wondered if the stars were watching back. He later wrote, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." We've long tried to interpret that line as permission to imagine. But what if it was a warning? A reminder that when the magic begins, you won't recognize it. You'll question it, doubt it, call it reflection, artifact, coincidence. And by the time you accept it, it will already have passed through your system, quietly, with grace, just like 3I Atlas. So here we are. We see the orbit. We see the pulse. We see the satellites. We see the pattern. And now we must see ourselves. Because if Atlas is signaling by light, by formation, by gravity, then the only real question left is not what it is, but why now? Why this pass? Why us? Leave a comment if you've ever stood beneath the sky and felt a sudden awareness, not of being alone, but of being included, as if the stars were not just decorations, but participants in a conversation you had only just realized had begun. Because the signal shouldn't exist, but it does, and that means we've entered the part of the story where silence becomes impossible. It's just numbers until it isn't. Orbital mechanics is a language of precision, a quiet game of gravity and inertia, charted across curved space-time. For centuries, we've used it to predict the future of celestial bodies, asteroids, comets, probes, even dust. But then came 3i Atlas, and the numbers started misbehaving. At first, it was subtle, a fractional shift in projected perihelion, then a slow curve against the expected solar deflection. Each deviation was within tolerances barely, but then came the compound. Small errors building not like noise, but like choice. And what we see now is no longer accidental, because 3i Atlas is threading the inner solar system with intent so sharp, so deliberate, that it has forced a redefinition of how we calculate its motion. Not as a passive object, but as a participant. Let's break this down. Traditional orbital solutions treat space as a dance floor of blind partners. Everything follows the same steps. One object moves, another reacts. All cause, all effect. But 3i Atlas is different. It doesn't follow, it anticipates. New analysis from NASA's Center for Near-Earth Object Studies has quietly upgraded the Atlas file to include a new designation, atypical gravitational response. That's not a term used lightly. It means they're no longer modeling its path as a natural object acted upon by gravity. They're modeling it as something acting within gravity. In other words, it's choosing, and those choices are impossible to ignore. The first critical maneuver occurred near Jupiter. A long, arcing course correction, barely perceptible at first, has now resulted in a 1.2 million kilometer offset from its expected path. That's not an error, that's a decision, and it sets the stage for everything that follows. Because now, Atlas is on track to intersect not Earth, but a point near Earth's orbital path, a location in space known as L5. L5 is one of Earth's 5 Lagrange points, zones of gravitational balance where objects can remain stable relative to our planet. L5, in particular, trails Earth by 60 degrees. It is shielded from direct solar interference. It is quiet. It is strategic. NASA once considered placing permanent space habitats there. 3i Atlas is arriving instead. Why? Because from L5, you can observe Earth continuously without being seen. You can monitor weather, military assets, orbital debris, and communications windows. L5 is a perch, a listening post, a vantage point, and now it is a destination. New simulations suggest Atlas will arrive in the vicinity of L5 within 68 days, on January 10th. That timing is not arbitrary. It coincides with a low radiation solar minimum, meaning the region will be at its most transparent to electromagnetic surveillance. Coincidence? Not anymore, because this trajectory does something else. It avoids visibility. Between now and its approach, Atlas passes behind the Sun relative to Earth during its closest maneuver, a period known as solar conjunction. During this window, our instruments cannot observe it. Not directly, not continuously. And that's when it slows. That's when it breaks. Propulsion analysts are now whispering what was once unthinkable. Atlas may be preparing for insertion, not into Earth orbit, but into a co-rotational shadow, an orbit that mimics Earth's, trailing behind just far enough to stay hidden, yet close enough to remain involved. This is not a flyby, it's residency, and it changes everything. Because if it stays, if it holds L5, it becomes permanent. Not a comet, not a wanderer, a structure, a node, a system. Think about what that means. It means someone or something has chosen to remain in our sky, just beyond our view, for reasons we do not understand. It means the era of passive astronomy has ended. It means the sky is now shared. And here's the kicker. L5 has long been rumored to host debris, anomalous observations, even amateur claims of temporary flickers. Nothing conclusive, nothing catalogued. But now, what if Atlas is returning to join something that's already there, or worse, something it left behind? There is no protocol for this, no checklist, no broadcast, no declaration, just a curve through space that rewrites our assumptions. Because Atlas's trajectory doesn't just change how we see the object, it changes how we see the system. The solar system is no longer a closed loop of passive bodies. It is now an interactive grid, and Atlas is the first line of code we've ever read. Leave a comment if you've ever taken a different road home, not by plan, but by instinct, and found yourself somewhere strangely meaningful. Because Atlas didn't follow our projections. It followed a map we didn't know existed, and now it's here, not to pass, but to remain. It's always been there, hasn't it? You look back now, across centuries of culture, carving, and song, and you begin to notice the fingerprints, not literal, not physical, but conceptual, repeating shapes, repeating stories. Clues we once called myth, now vibrating in the same key as Three-Eye Atlas. Because the oldest stories weren't lies, they were warnings. The Babylonians told of a star that turned against the firmament and moved unlike all others. The Egyptians painted elongated, green glowing eyes above their temples, objects that watched, blinked, and vanished. The Hopi described a second sun that comes not to burn, but to observe. Even the Norse spoke of skirl and hearty celestial wolves who chase the sun and moon, fated to return every so often from beneath the world. Return, observe, fade, repeat. What if those weren't metaphors? What if they were memory, not of ships or gods, but orbits? Three-Eye Atlas is not the first time this pattern has emerged. It's just the first time we've had the math to see it, the instruments to decode the rhythm. And now, as it curves toward L5, toward residency, we begin to realize the ancients may have seen it too. Not just once, but cyclically. Imagine it. A civilization, thousands of years ago, witnessing the green glow, watching an object that accelerates silently, seeing 6 points of light orbit something they cannot name. What language do they use? What metaphor do they reach for? Gods, monsters, eyes in the sky, and then it leaves, and they remember the shape, the silence, the feeling, so they carve it in stone, not for explanation, for endurance, for the future, for us, and we didn't recognize it until now, because now we have the lens, the software, the simulations, and they match the myths. Take the Sumerian Kiskanu tree, a glowing object depicted with branches that curve in a Fibonacci spiral, orbiting a central trunk. Most assumed it's symbolic, but overlay the orbital positions of the Atlas formation. The 6 orbiting lights and the geometry lines up, not perfectly, but uncomfortably close. Or consider the Mesoamerican depictions of Quetzalcoatl's return, always associated with a serpent of light arriving in a cycle, unseen until it crosses behind the sun. Behind the sun, just like Atlas, just like now, these echoes from the past aren't predictions. They're observations, historical detections, misunderstood in context, but faithful in form. And this raises a deeper question. If 3i Atlas has returned before, did it leave anything here? Not spacecraft, not messages, something more subtle, blueprints. We've long puzzled over ancient sites that align not just with solstices, but with stellar events thousands of years apart. The Giza pyramids aligned with Orion's belt, Stonehenge marking lunar cycles with tolerances tighter than early chronometers, the Antikythera mechanism predicting eclipses with gears shaped like orbital precession. What if those sites weren't just built for the sky? What if they were built because of something that came from it? A reminder encoded in architecture, a response to an earlier awakening. And now the cycle begins again. The numbers don't lie. If Atlas completes its arc into the L5 region, its visibility from Earth will reduce to near zero for years at a time, except during specific nodal crossings. And the first of those crossings, it happens on the equinox, March 20th, the day when light and dark are equal, a day of balance. Myth has always loved balance, and Atlas seems to honor it. That's not a trajectory, that's a ritual. And rituals are how memory survives. It's why we sing, why we gather, why we carve the same shapes over and over again, even when we've forgotten their meanings. So perhaps we never forgot. Perhaps the meanings were waiting for the math to return, and now it has. Astrophysicists are beginning to publish not papers yet, but models, quiet uploads, simulations that show Atlas's path not as a hyperbola, but a graceful parabola shifting into resonance, one that touches the orbits of Mars, Earth, Venus, and then curves outward to hover at the edge. Not to escape, to wait. That's not a collision course. That's choreography. And suddenly you understand. The past isn't a mystery. It's a manual. It's the guidebook for how to see the present. And if 3i Atlas is following an ancient route, then maybe, just maybe, someone else mapped it. Someone who already danced through this system. Someone who left the music behind, not in machines, but in myths, not in frequencies, but in forms. Leave a comment if you've ever had a dream that felt older than you, like you were borrowing someone else's memory, and it came with symbols you couldn't shake. Because maybe the past is not just behind us. Maybe it loops, maybe it returns, and maybe this was always part of the design. It no longer makes sense to call 3i Atlas a traveler. Travel implies departure, a beginning, an end. But what do you call something that curves into a system not to pass through but to stay? Not temporarily, not while the tail fades and the coma evaporates, but persistently, in full gravitational balance, as if it belongs here. You call it what it is, not a comet, a node, because that's what the latest models suggest. Not a one-time trajectory, not an accidental arc, but a long-duration insertion into a metastable region of the solar system, L5. Our trailing Lagrange point, the one we don't watch, the one not protected by satellites, the one where a craft could sit, undisturbed, forever. And now, from this altitude, from the long view, you begin to see the outline of something much larger, not just a silent visitor, but infrastructure. The sky, it turns out, may already be occupied, not by fleets, not by empires, but by architecture. What kind? Distributed, durable, self-regulating. Think of the way we build now. Server farms, relay towers, GPS constellations. No one satellite does everything. Each node handles a task. Each repeats its signal. Each sits in orbit, listening and forwarding, watching and waiting. What if 3i Atlas is one of those? Not new, Not even recent, just reactivated. That's the theory now creeping through the corridors of academic astrophysics. Not publicly, of course, not yet, but in direct messages, at late-night conferences, whispered over laptops, glowing with orbital plots, that Atlas is part of a system, and that system may have been here long before us. What kind of system? An interstellar mesh, a surveillance web, a distributed archive. Pick your metaphor. The conclusion is the same. If Atlas is a node, it is not acting alone. It is part of a sequence. A network of objects placed across star systems, not to signal loudly, but to remain persistently aware. We do this. We plant repeaters in ocean floors. We place weather buoys in storm corridors. We position solar sensors at planetary Lagrange points. We know this pattern. We invented it. So what if it was already here? What if the reason 3i Atlas isn't talking to us is because we're not the ones it's here to talk to? And here's the chilling part. We may have interrupted something, not maliciously, not violently, but by detecting it, watching it, interpreting its behavior as signal, not routine. Imagine if one of our ocean buoys suddenly activated because it realized it had been seen, changed course, made adjustments. You'd wonder who's watching it. And now we're watching Atlas, and it's doing something uncharacteristic for a comet. It's responding, not to gravity, to observation. Astronomers at the South African Large Telescope have confirmed that the timing of Atlas's recent acceleration correlates within minutes to an array of ground-based observations. That's impossible. No comet should respond to passive observation. And yet, it appears it did. This implies awareness, not consciousness, perhaps, but reactivity, and that is something we associate with systems, not stones. So if Atlas is responding slightly, subtly to where we point our eyes, then it's not just an object in motion, it's a participant in ours. This rewrites more than just astronomy. It touches philosophy, ontology, ethics. If we are not alone, if we are, in fact, immersed in a network of ancient nodes, silently observing, then our model of the universe must evolve. Not empty, not inert, but inhabited, by watchers who do not speak, by objects that drift into position, hold still, and wait. For what? We don't know. A signal? A partner? A command? Or nothing at all? Maybe that's the point. Maybe the purpose of the node is only to be, to collect, to preserve, to stabilize. That would explain the weight, the precision, the absence of error. Atlas has moved, in recent weeks, into a corridor with such fine tolerances that even our deep space probes would struggle to mimic it. That's not navigation, that's maintenance. We are watching an ancient process reassert itself, quietly, beautifully, inevitably, and still it doesn't speak, because it doesn't need to. Its existence is the message that the sky is not blank, that the system is not empty, that we are not just observers, but the newly observed. Leave a comment if you've ever had the sense that something about your surroundings, your city, your planet, your universe, was built on a foundation you can't quite explain. Something too precise, too aligned, too still. Because maybe we've mistaken the background for the blueprint, and 3i Atlas is reminding us of what was always here. We just didn't know how to see it, until now. It's one thing to witness a strange object pass through our skies. We've done that before. Oumuamua, 2i, Borisov, dozens of icy bodies streaking past the sun on wild arcs. They come, they go. We measure, we forget. But this is different. Because 3i Atlas isn't leaving. And when something decides to stay, when it curves into orbit and takes up residence in a gravitational eddy designed by the solar system itself, you begin to feel the shift in your bones. This isn't just a story about a comet anymore. It's a story about us. Because now the question flips. If 3I Atlas is here to stay, what does that make us? In this equation, we've spent millennia projecting our meaning into the stars. We are the thinkers, the calculators, the dreamers, and the signalers. We search for echoes. We look for patterns. We hope that if anything else is out there, it might one day see us and say, yes, you're not alone. But what if that moment already happened? And what if, instead of conversation, we got company? Not loud, not immediate, just present. 3I Atlas isn't interacting in any traditional sense. No signals, no flashes, no diplomatic landings. It's just there, holding space in L5. Orbiting alongside us at a silent distance of 22 million kilometers. The same point we once dreamed of placing colonies. But it got there first. And now, our role has shifted. No longer discoverers. Now, the observed. That's a hard thing for a young species to process. We've defined ourselves by our expansion, our curiosity, our reach. And suddenly, we are the ones being reached toward, not with hands, not with voices, but with trajectory. And here's the unsettling part. It doesn't feel hostile. It feels inevitable. Like this was always part of the plan, that we would rise, learn to watch, learn to listen, and eventually, we'd catch sight of the thing that had been with us all along. Not a god, not a monster, just a witness. And witnessing, as it turns out, is more powerful than contact. Because when you're being watched, you have to ask who you are. Who are we? We call ourselves intelligent, technological, civilized. But those are labels we invented. Would an external observer agree? Or would they see noise, wars, pollution, confusion, signals shouting over one another? A planet full of life, but unsure of its story. Maybe that's the test, not of worthiness, but of awareness. Because now, under the gaze of something steady, silent, and old, we are forced to look inward. We are not alone. So, who are we becoming? Already, the cultural shift has begun. You feel it in the quiet late-night threads, the essays that go viral without explanation, the artists painting spirals where they used to paint stars. Something has changed in us. In the knowing, we're being seen, and for the first time in modern history, we are responding not with conquest, but with contemplation. Maybe that's the most hopeful sign of all. No missiles, no panic, just questions. That's what makes us human. And maybe that's what Atlas is here to see, to record, to mark. Not because we passed a test, not because we triggered some ancient threshold, but because we did the hardest thing a species can do. We noticed, we looked past the noise, we saw the orbit, we saw the math, we heard the silence, and we didn't turn away. We turned inward, and in doing so, we changed our trajectory, too. So what happens now? That's the unknown. There's no protocol, no book of cosmic diplomacy for objects that refuse to explain themselves. But maybe the next move is ours. Not to respond with signals or missions, but with reflection, with stewardship, with a new kind of patience. Because maybe, just maybe, Atlas will wait to see if we can sustain that awareness, if we can grow into the kind of civilization that builds meaning into its orbits, not just technology, not just expansion, but presence. Maybe that's how we become more than loud. Maybe that's how we become seen. Leave a comment if you've ever sat in silence and felt like the stillness was full, not empty, as if someone or something was gently waiting for you to notice yourself. Because if Atlas is here to stay, then maybe it's time we decided who we want to be. It's starting to feel like a secret we were never meant to learn, not because someone tried to hide it, but because the structure of the cosmos itself, its rhythms, its scale, its deep indifference, was designed to keep truths like this veiled for a while longer, maybe a century, maybe 1,000 years. And yet, here we are. We've seen it. We've seen 3I Atlas curve into our system, not as a comet, not as a coincidence, but as an insertion. We've watched it break, pivot, pulse, and settle like something designed not for arrival, but for residency. And we've felt the tension that comes with it. Because deep down, a part of us suspects we weren't supposed to notice. Not yet. Not this early. And that feeling of premature awareness whispers through the observatories and the data packets, through the silence of Atlas itself, like a classroom door swinging open before the teacher finishes writing the lesson. We caught a glimpse too soon, or maybe just in time. Because what happens when a species sees the watchers? What does it do when the hidden node is no longer hidden? So far, nothing. But that nothing is a choice, and it echoes louder than any response. We are not responding with radio bursts or hasty probes. We're not launching weapons or sending messages. We're watching, quietly, deeply, like someone reading the final page of a book they didn't know they were writing. And 3I Atlas, it holds still, its course now stabilizing into an orbital range that synchronizes with Earth's own. Not intercepting, not drifting, but echoing. Every 34 years, it will return to our vicinity, and in between, it waits. From L5, that point of balance behind us, the place no one watches. That's the most haunting part, because L5 is perfect. It trails Earth, shielded from solar noise. It allows full observational access to Earth's dark side. It is the ideal perch for long-term monitoring, and we were never supposed to occupy it. Not yet. We dreamed of space stations there, prototypes, colonies, but nothing ever came of them. Budgets failed, programs dissolved, as if, somehow, the universe was subtly keeping us out of that seat. Now it's taken, and we have to wonder, has it always been? Or was this just the first time we arrived at the threshold early enough to see who was already in the room? The silence of Atlas is no longer confusing. It's intentional. It is not signaling us, because it is not here for a conversation. It is here for continuity, and continuity doesn't need to explain itself. Think about that. An object, no. A presence that slips into position, stabilizes its orbit, and does absolutely nothing. No movement, no error, no deviation, because it doesn't need to move anymore. It's where it was always meant to be. And we are the anomaly now. We are the variable. We are the system that spoke first. Maybe that was our mistake, or our evolution. Maybe the moment we invented radio, we stopped being passive. Maybe the moment we built telescopes, sharp enough to measure fractional changes in brightness, we crossed a line, subtle, invisible, irreversible, the line where watchers must become witnessed. And Atlas, it doesn't blink because it never needed to. And now the questions shift. Not, what is it? Not, who sent it? But, how long has this been happening? And what else are we not supposed to know yet? Because this object, this node, has forced a re-examination of everything. Solar system dynamics, historical anomalies, myth, the nature of orbital silence. It has taught us to look not at what changes, but at what persists. What holds position? What never reacts? And in that unreacting stillness, we've begun to understand that intelligence doesn't need to be dramatic. It can just be there, perpetual, subtle, balanced, like gravity, like L5, like the hum in your ears when all the machines are turned off and you finally realize what quiet actually sounds like. Maybe Atlas is here not to study us. Maybe it's here to study how we handle knowing. Because the moment of contact might not be a handshake. It might be an awareness. A point when one species learns to live with the truth that it is no longer alone and never really was. A moment where nothing happens, but everything changes. So we keep watching, and it keeps watching, and no one says a word. Leave a comment if you've ever known something so quietly profound that you didn't tell anyone. Not because you couldn't, but because you didn't know how. Because that's what this feels like. We know something now, and maybe we were never supposed to. You wake in the middle of the night and check the sky. Not because of an alert, not because of breaking news, but because something inside you whispered that now is the moment to look. And there it is, Atlas, no longer a streak or a blur or a statistical outlier, but a fixture, a constant, holding its silent post at L5 like it always belonged there. But tonight, something else is moving. The first reports come from Chile, a glint, not Atlas itself, but near it, a brief flicker. Then from Australia, another point of light, same sector, opposite time. Then, over a cold horizon in northern Canada, a green-shifted bloom appears just off the expected orbital path. At first, astronomers assume a meteor trail, an artifact, maybe a refraction from solar particles. But the data lines up. Different hemispheres, different equipment, same vector. Something else is arriving. And it isn't fast, it's drifting. That's what makes it so unnerving. Not the burst of speed we associate with interstellar objects, but the slow, deliberate nature of motion that implies control, like a craft parking itself alongside a dock. No thrust, no flourish, just a graceful glide into invisibility. L5, we now understand, is not empty. It never was. And Atlas may not be alone. Infrared scans from ESA's solar orbiter, taken just before its own safe mode protocol, activated curiously without trigger, show a radial distortion pattern near the Atlas core. Not massive, but layered, as if 6 smaller masses were adjusting their position and then aligning. We've seen this formation before, not in nature. In design, hexagonal symmetry, 3 around, 3 beneath, like petals, like arms, like antennae. You don't get structures like that by accident, not in vacuum, not across millions of kilometers. This isn't a comet, it's a constellation. And now the question sharpens like a blade in your hand. Why now? For months, Atlas moved alone, slowing, aligning, entering orbit. But this new set of movements timed so close to Earth's solstice window suggests synchronization, like a system waking in stages. And in the silence that follows, a deeper fear stirs. What if Atlas was never the object of interest? What if it was the key, the activator, the signal? Every species imagines that it will make first contact by reaching out. But what if we weren't the first to act? What if we were the last? Because the numbers are precise. The 6 objects around Atlas are maintaining distance with an error margin of less than 2 kilometers over a full orbit. That kind of positioning requires active feedback, not gravity, not luck, guidance. And if they are adjusting, then they are awake. NASA's Juno team quietly released a data package last week, containing anomalous magnetometer readings from their outer heliosphere array. Buried within was a note, resonance-like frequency shift, matching modeled orbital cadence of Atlas at L5. A resonance, not a noise, a response, as if the system we thought we were observing is beginning to respond to us, but not with a message, with formation. This isn't communication, it's positioning, and you can feel it now, can't you? The sense that we are being brought into alignment, that the dance we never saw has been happening all around us, choreographed in forces we barely understand. The solar wind, the dust curves, the light pulses, all leading to this moment where something shifts and everything begins to echo. What does it mean? No one knows. Not yet. But for the first time, scientists are no longer calling it a comet. The latest internal documentation lists 3I Atlas as non-Keplerian object of coordinated motion. It has left the realm of nature. It has entered the realm of decision. And with that shift, we face a new mirror. Not one of glass or telescopes, but of time. Because maybe this has happened before, thousands of years ago, perhaps longer, perhaps often. Maybe each time, a species wakes just enough to see the pattern, and then either turns away or doesn't survive the knowing. But we are still here, watching, and now aware. The sixth object stabilizes at 90 degrees from Atlas's forward axis. The symmetry completes, the system holds, and the skies fall quiet again. Leave a comment if you've ever had the feeling that the moment you thought you were alone was the very moment someone entered the room. Because tonight, something has entered the room, and it's not saying a word. Somewhere tonight, a telescope sits idle, its cooling systems hum, its instruments point not at a star or a planet, or even at Atlas itself, but at the space between. Because now, we understand. The story was never just about the object. It was about what the object revealed in us. Across the solar system, 6 new points hold their place stable, silent, geometrically locked around the core we once called a comet. 3I Atlas no longer moves like a visitor. It hangs like punctuation. The period at the end of a long sentence we didn't know we were writing. And the words, they were never theirs. They were ours. This entire time, we've looked for a signal. We've hoped for a message encoded in binary, or light, or radio wave. Something to tell us what we are, or who sent it, or what happens next. But Atlas didn't speak, because the signal wasn't coming. It had already arrived. And the signal was us, our awareness, our noticing, our emergence from static into rhythm, our first whispered, what if, echoing through time, not as a question to them, but as an answer to the cosmos. Because when a civilization becomes conscious enough to recognize patterns in silence, it has already begun to speak in the universal tongue. Not math, not music, awareness. And awareness cannot be faked. It cannot be rushed. It arrives when a world stares into the dark and feels the pull of orbit, not just as gravity, but as invitation. You feel that pull now. You feel it in your chest, in the strange quiet between breaths, when you stop to consider the scale of it all. Atlas is no longer an event. It is a condition, a permanent fixture in our sky, and not just in the visible sense. It lives now in our psychology, in our maps, in our stories. Children born this year will grow up with this object always there, always watching. It will become normal, like the moon, like the tides, like the cold fact that we are not alone and never were. But here's the quiet terror. It still hasn't done anything. It hasn't unfolded. It hasn't transmitted. It hasn't acknowledged, and yet we change, because the presence of the unchanging is a force of its own. You don't have to touch fire to know it burns. You just have to feel it from across the room. And Atlas burns, cold and green and slow. The nature of the system now surrounding it is clearer. 6 bodies, each with measured reflectivity and synchronized oscillation. The symmetry suggests stabilization, not maneuver. These are not ships, not probes, not drones. They are nodes, anchors, placed or summoned around Atlas to form a geometry that repeats across scales. It's fractal, it's ancient, and it's familiar. We've drawn it in temples. We've stitched it into flags. The hexagon, the spiral, the central eye. Every civilization has rendered this shape not as ornament, but as orientation. What if we were always meant to remember it? And now, we do. The orbit holds, the system sleeps, or maybe it's listening, not to our words, but to our time, because time is the one language we all share. Stars age, mountains erode, comets fall, and civilizations rise and reflect. And reflection is louder than transmission. We reflect now, not in panic, but in awe. And maybe that's what was always supposed to happen. Maybe contact was never about meeting another species face to face. Maybe it was about becoming a species capable of seeing itself through someone else's silence. That's what 3i Atlas gave us. Not a voice, a mirror. And in that mirror, we find not fear but possibility, not endings but potential, and not aliens, but continuity. Because whatever Atlas is, wherever it came from, however long it has waited, it waited for this. Not for war, not for wonder, but for a species to say, we see it now, and mean it. Leave a comment if you feel like something just shifted not out there, but in here. Because if 3i Atlas came to witness the birth of awareness, then let this be the moment we mark. The moment when silence stopped being empty and started being shared. And so we arrive at the end, where nothing concludes and everything begins. A comet that isn't, a silence that speaks, a sky that remembers. You close your eyes now, knowing the watchers never left, and perhaps neither did we. Sleep, not in fear, but in orbit with the knowledge that awareness is the message, and you are already part of it. Leave a comment telling me what time it is and what the stars look like from where you are. Because tonight, the stars are watching back, and tomorrow we'll be ready. Until then, drift softly. You are not alone.